Hello, dear students and esteemed learners. Welcome back. Welcome to my course on Sociology of Health. Now, today we are going to begin our course for the 12th week. So, this is the last week of our course, and this week we will cover the topics related to the broader theme, which is health inequality and sociology of health. This is lecture number 56, and today we'll talk about health inequality and inequity, emerging challenges. So, let me very briefly talk about the theme of the week and then we'll talk about this lecture. So, health inequality is emerging as one of the very important challenge at global level. Basically, societies do witness different types of inequalities. Some of these are actually identified as structural inequalities, basically which are inherent in the structure of the society itself. For example, we talk about the income based inequalities. Those are structured, inherent in the core structure of the society. Or for that matter, we also talk about patriarchy, the gender based inequality. That is also something which is already structured, because those things continue since a very long period of time, maybe thousands of years. And so they develop some kind of acceptance within the structure itself. On the other hand, there are new types of inequalities which are coming into existence. And health inequality is one of that type which is coming into existence. So, what are the consequences of that? Which factors basically are responsible for the causation of these new forms of inequalities? These are very important issues. And sociology of health, as a subdiscipline of sociology, is very much interested in exploring, understanding, and suggesting the way outs. So, from this point of view, this perspective, we'll talk about some of the important things in this week, and let us start our this lecture, which is on health inequality and inequity, emerging challenges. The concepts that I have covered in this lecture are understanding health inequality and inequity, then a brief reference of the Alma Ata and Astana Declaration, then very important intervention in the form of the Black Report, then health inequality as a basic form of inequality, and demand to adopt the inequality adjusted human development index. So, we will try to understand all these and try to have a sociological perspective on all these issues. Basically, our focus is not only on understanding these concepts, but also trying to understand these concepts sociologically, so that we can have a very comprehensive understanding about the phenomenon which are going on. Now, what is health inequality and what is health inequity? And why do we make use of the terms like inequality and inequity? This is something which is very important and very basic. We need to understand. Health inequality does not mean any kind of health difference or biological difference only, but the differences in health which are potentially avoidable through policy intervention. So, if we look at people around us, or we look at people world over, then definitely people are not similar to each other in terms of the specific health indicators or health outcome. There are differences. And yes, we all know that these differences are caused because of multiple factors. Most importantly, there are biological factors, or the genetic factors, or the environmental factors. Yes, we agree to that. However, there is an increasing understanding that even the biological factors are influenced by the social determinants of health. That means the biological indicators or factors do not operate just on their own. They operate in the larger complex of the mechanism of social determinants. That means the social determinants do play a very important role. That means the kind of differences which are existing are not only reflecting the differences at the level of the biological things, but also at the level of the working of the social determinants and the larger social environment. In this context, we need to understand health inequality. And what is very important here is this, that when we talk about the differences in health at the level of the individual, then this is one phenomenon. And at the level of the group, then this is another phenomenon. So when one group or a larger collectivity is showing underperformance, for example, if one group is having high infant mortality or high maternal mortality or higher exposure to the morbidities, then this is going beyond the individual differences because the entire group is performing poorly. That means there are certain factors which are responsible for causation of the underperformance at the level of that particular social group. And when we compare the performance of these social groups, then we get to know about the social inequalities. And then there is another important point, that if there is underperformance in health outcome of certain groups, and if there is an appropriate policy intervention, then can we make an improvement in the outcome? And the answer is yes. So no matter what kind of disadvantages a specific social group was having, but if right kind of intervention is made at the right time, then the challenges could be addressed. That means if one particular group is having high infant mortality or maternal mortality or morbidity, and there are good policy and program initiative and good healthcare service and basically proper provisioning of the social determinants, then the outcome will get improved within a specific time period. That means this group will not continue to have underperformance, rather it will make an improvement. And so these inequalities could be minimized. And so people prefer to make use of the term inequity when they are trying to identify inequality, right? Because inequality is existing only because of lack of policy intervention, lack of political will, lack of specific intention to make an improvement in the social determinants of healthcare. So this is a broader framework under which we try to understand health inequality and inequity. I hope you got the basic you got some kind of basic understanding about use of the term inequality and inequity. Inequality in health can be explained as a particular type of difference in health that could be potentially shaped by policies. The point that we mentioned. It is a difference in which disadvantaged social groups, basically, health inequality is a difference in which disadvantaged social group, such as the poor or the racial and ethnic minorities or women or other groups. In Indian context, we can talk about the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, some of the ethnic minorities. So these groups systematically experience worse health or greater health risk than more advantaged social groups. That means it's talking about the relative positioning of certain groups at an advantage position or at an disadvantage position. It is a kind of social construct that we are trying to understand when we are talking about health inequality and inequity. Health inequalities or disparities include comparison not only between the best and the worst of groups in a given category, like the richest versus the poorest, but also between the most socially disadvantaged groups and all others. That means there are two different ways by which we can approach this. One, through the economic lenses, the rich versus poor, and then second, from the social advantage position perspective, that means those who are in a socially advantaged position and those who are in a socially deprived position. Then how did we develop these kind of lenses to understand the problems related to health inequality or inequity? If we ask this question, then we will get the answer that primarily it was after the publication of the Black Report way back in 1980 that we got to know about the health inequalities prevailing at a larger level. We'll talk about this in a moment at length, but let me include here two, three important points also. Now, Marmot has conducted good number of empirical studies at the level of World Bank, talking about and understanding basically the health inequalities prevailing globally, primarily within the developed countries. And Marmot says that wider inequalities in health represent wider inequalities in society, although the evidence on this is still problematic. Now, what is being stated here? It says that wider inequality in health is representing the wider inequalities in society, because if a society is divided between groups, then the health outcome will also remain divided. That means inequalities in health is a reflection of the prevalence of inequalities in the larger society. Now, this is very helpful in understanding the kind of inequalities which are prevailing in the society at a larger level. Then there are other evidences also. The cross-national evidences suggest that greater the degree of socio-economic inequality within a society, the steeper the gradient of health inequality. That means keeping aside the economic inequalities, if there are socio-economic disparities and inequalities prevailing in a society, like the gender disparity or the caste-based disparity or ethnic disparities, then greater the socio-economic inequality prevailing, steeper will be the gradient of health inequality. That means different types of inequalities actually enhance, intensify the health inequalities. There's a direct relationship kind of thing. Although it is stated that we are not having enough evidences in terms of the empirical studies, but good number of studies are being conducted on this also. The inequalities in health reveal not only the inequalities present in various other segments of the society, but also a result of various ongoing social, cultural, and politico economic process. Now, this is again very important. See, if we try to understand what is happening at the level of the society in last 100 years, then the increasing inequalities in the domain of health is also a reflection of the kind of inequalities which are emerging in the societies themselves, and that basically makes it necessary to understand what kind of processes of social exclusion are going on in the society, or what kind of marginalization is going in the society. So, on the one side, we are talking about the democratic societies. We are following the democratic principles. We are following the principles of equality and justice and all other fundamental values. But simultaneously, what is happening that new forms of inequalities are coming into existence. So, understanding these would be very necessary to address the problems being caused by these new processes. Health inequality is a more contemporary consequence of poor investment on public health, improper development planning, and narrow health policy designs. Akram in his book has mentioned about these points, and there are several other points that we will discuss in the forthcoming slides also. We talked about this point earlier, that why do we identify the health inequalities as inequity? Because proper appropriate policy intervention can make an improvement in the situations related to health inequality, and so these are basically addressable, and so these are considered as inequity and not inequalities. And Amartya Sen is basically one important contributor in this particular domain. And we all know that how Amartya Sen and Mahbubul Haq basically proposed the notion of human development, and then the Human Development Index actually came into existence. So the viewpoints of Sen is very important. Then at the level of the global agencies, we can say that the Alma Ata Declaration way back in 1978 basically talked about the existing gross inequality in the health status of the people. Then the Astana Declaration of 2018, after 40 years of Alma Ata Declaration, is again saying similar things. And the Astana Declaration says that it is unacceptable that inequity in health and disparity in health outcome persist. That means, although we had the goal of health for all in the Alma Ata Declaration, but perhaps we could not achieve that, because even after 40 years of that declaration, the Astana Declaration is saying that inequity is prevailing and disparity is prevailing. So now the Alma Ata and Astana declarations, they also talk about the prevalence of health inequality and inequity. But what is surprising is this, that the Alma Ata declaration way back in 1978 talked about the goal of health for all and mentioned that there is inequality prevailing in health status. And after 40 years of this Alma Ata declaration in 90, which was basically made in 1978, the Astana Declaration made in 2018 again says that it is unacceptable that inequity in health and disparity in health outcome persist. That means inequity and inequalities are persisting despite of the efforts which are made in improving the health outcome, and that basically confirms the understanding that if there are social inequalities existing in the society, then there will be a reflection of that in the health outcome also. Now, we talked about the black report earlier also, right? And we will have a fair understanding about this now. In 1980, the United Kingdom Department of Health and Social Security published the report of the Working Group on Inequalities in Health. And this is also known as the Black Report after the name of the chairperson, that is Sir Douglas Black. The report showed in the extent of which ill health and death are unequally distributed among the population of Britain, and suggested that these inequalities have been widening rather than diminishing since the establishment of National Health Service in 1948. Now, this report is very important in the sense that it says that even after having the National Health Service, the inequalities are remaining and persisting and even coming into existence. The report concluded that these inequalities were not mainly attributable to failings in the national health services, but rather to many other social inequalities influencing health, like income, education, housing, diet, employment. That means the inequalities are coming into existence and prevailing because of the inequalities inherent in the social determinants of health. So that is the very important finding that which came out from the Black report, that inequalities in health are caused because of the inequalities prevailing in the distribution of the social determinants of health, and the social determinants basically influence the health outcome. So with this perspective, basically we can understand the kind of inequalities and inequities coming into existence in the domain of health and prevailing at global level. And of course, India is not unaffected by this. India is also witnessing this kind of thing. We'll talk about the scenario related to India in the next lecture, but this is basically something which is prevailing almost everywhere. Now, one of the very important contributions basically to understand these types of inequality and inequities came from the work of Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate. Now, health inequality, according to Amartya Sen, is one of the basic forms of inequality, as health contributes to a person's basic capability to function. Now, one of the basic form of inequality, what does it mean? It means that there are different forms of inequality. So, as we say that income is one of the basic form of inequality. So, just like that, health is also a basic form of inequality. That means health outcomes are not simply a derivation of the income inequalities. Rather, they come into existence on their own. It means if you look at the things at theoretical level, so if we look at the things from the Marxist perspective, so Marx or the Marxists are basically the economic determinist. So the Marxists also talk about health inequalities. But for the Marxists, these are caused because of the inequality prevailing in the domain of income. But for Sen, the health inequalities are not caused because of the income inequalities. These are one of the basic form of inequality, and they come into existence on their own because of good number of other social factors and of course economic factors. So the economic factors can be one of the contributor, but it is not simply an extension of that. This is a very important sociological understanding. And then why this health inequality is considered one of the basic form of inequality? This is something which Amartya Sen has helped to understand. For saying health is the most basic requirement for every individual, and denial of health is not only the denial of good life chance, it is also the denial of fairness and justice. That means if we aspire to achieve the values of justice and fairness in modern societies, we need to take into consideration the issues related to health also, because denial of health would be like denial of not only good life chance but also denial of fairness and justice. Now Sen has used basically the capability approach. Capability refers to the freedom of persons or groups to promote or achieve things which they consider valuable, and it was used by Sen to attain the foundational importance of freedom. So health is related to capability, and capability is related to basically the notion of freedom. So that way, denial of health is denial of freedom, which basically goes against the spirit of the modern democratic society. And that is why talking about health and talking about health inequality is so important. Then Anand, extending the arguments of Amartya Sen, has stated that there should be more aversion to inequalities in health than inequalities in income, because health has both instrumental and intrinsic value while income has only instrumental value. Now, this argument is again very important, and it says that the inequalities in the field of health are actually more serious than the inequalities existing at the level of income. Why? Because income has only instrumental value, but health is having instrumental as well as intrinsic value. And in very simple words, you can say that if a person is deprived of income, then he or she can earn it. Given an opportunity, he or she can become rich. But if a person is deprived of health, then basically it will not be technically possible for that person to get it back, because health is not something which we can regain if it is getting degenerated over a period of time. So that is the basic understanding on the basis of which we are talking about this health inequality and inequity. Now, two or three small things we can talk about here. The Marxist sociologists, the feminists, the subaltern theorists, they have all been talking about the inequalities. However, in their arguments, they talk about the basic form of inequality which is identifiable with their approach. For example, for the Marxists, it is related to income. For the feminists, it is related to patriarchy. And for the subalterns, it is related to caste. So they see a kind of extension of that inequality to the domain of health. But for Sen, health inequalities themselves are the basic form of inequality. And so we can say that health inequality is more severe than income inequality. And one last thing we can say here, that there is an increasing demand to have the inequality adjusted human development index. We all know that the Human Development Index was developed because of the contribution made by Amartya Sen and Mahbubul Haq, and that has played a very important role in making the right kind of intervention in the domain of health, because we are having the Human Development Index for all countries world over, right? But now people think, and even Sen is of the view that this Human Development Index is unable to reflect the inequality component inherent in that particular society. So, this HDI should be improved to adopt the inequality related components. That means the inequality existing in either of the three component, whether that is income inequality, or that is educational inequality, or that is health related inequality. And our focus here would be on the health related inequality. Once we have the IHDI, that is the inequality adjusted human development index, that means we are in the right track to minimize the health inequalities at global level. So I hope you got a fair understanding about health inequalities and inequities. And in the next lecture, we'll talk about the health inequality and inequity in Indian context. So thank you very much for being with me, and we'll meet in the next class. Take care.